The session of this afternoon is about trustworthiness and explainable AI. And I'm particularly happy, as you will see, that we will kind of continue the panel discussion of this morning that was touching upon on ethical topics, ethical issues, and in the talks, you will see some elements of answers to those questions. I'm going to chair this session. We had three speakers, myself, Antonietta Grasso, Professor Alessandra Rossi from the University of Naples, Federico II, and Janfer Akbulut, I hope I pronounce it correctly, from Google DeepMind. The organization is like in the morning, so we will have the talks in sequence, and we will love to take your questions at the end during the panel discussion. So the first talk is from myself, Maria Antonietta Grasso from NAVER LABS Europe, and I'm going to talk to you about the situated nature of trust. This is joint work with my colleagues Ji-San Park and Jutta Wilamowski and Joseph Rosen and Laurent Besacier from the natural language processing team at NLE. This talk is a kind of introduction to what comes next, and now let's jump into it. So, trustworthy AI. How to assure for trustworthiness in the very powerful technology we are developing today is certainly the most interesting and challenging topic I had to deal so far in my career. I like to remind that society is also calling for solutions to this problem. You see here on the slide just a few initiatives, the European Union, the United States, South Korea, where governments are providing guidelines for what they expect for the technology to adhere to. I like to remind this to us because we have a major responsibility in helping with this as technologists. So, but why are these concerns so loudly raised? It is my opinion that the core reason, probably for me at least, is that the nature of the AI knowledge is intrinsically probabilistic, while human knowledge is causal in nature. So I'm amazed every day of the performances of generative AI and foundation models. Really, every day amazed. But that's because of the size that these models have that has now reached with the latest ChatGPT release, the order of trillions of parameters connected among them. So that's intrinsically different from the way as humans think about phenomena, which is causal. We need to reduce a phenomenon to a small enough set of variables to create the links among them to explain what is going on. So if technologies like this, we may take an approach of thinking, okay, let's keep improving the technology, let's make it 100% truthful, 100% explainable. This is a warning that this technology solutionism approach, just focusing on the technology to solve a technology problem, is a narrow focus. For problems like this, I will argue in this talk, we need to better understand the problem that we are trying to solve, in this case, how to manage this trust relationship between people and technology, and in this journey, we may even find out that involving the people and understanding them better, this can help to compensate and address some of the limits of the technology. So this is part of a line of research at NLE, where that's our approach, understanding the principles that drive the users, their values, what is good for them, and do our work as a technologist, as a designer of technology, to align the two. This is a long-lasting line of research. In the past, we have been addressing humane algorithmic management, and in the presentation, there are many references for further details for anyone who is interested. So you see a paper here on the right on that topic. More recent topic has been in the context of privacy, and I will use examples from those recent studies, and toxicity control, especially in the NLP team at NLE. And then works on the legibility of AI. So tomorrow there will be a talk where you will see that sometimes it's good for legibility of AI to make the technology behavior all so smooth that it becomes invisible, and so that we don't need to think about the technology, what it's doing and why. So it's a teaser to the talk from Mattia Racca tomorrow. In the talk of today, it's on the other side, legibility. So I will show you how we are working on making the AI principle visible, not only during the interaction, but before and after deployment. So it's the other side of the spectrum. And in the team, we have an approach deeply grounded in user studies, but especially in the ethnomethodological approach, which is one of the methods very good to understand the situated nature of the problems that we study. So now after this introduction, let's jump in the talk. This is the outline. I will give some definitions, which I think are important to ground how we address the problem. Then the core of it is about trust and why it's situated, and this will be articulated in 3 dimensions. And then at the end, if I have time, as I hope, I will explain you what is the very recent work. It's ongoing work, but it gives some sense of what we are doing. So, but let's start with trust. So, one of the possible mistakes we may make when we think about trust is to think about it as an absolute value, so something which is fixed. So, the level of trust, in this case we are talking of technology, it's something we can work upon and is fixed. While that's not the case, because trust is always the result of a relationship. We are trusting people, but also technology, for doing something for us, with us. So this to say that it's part of a process of trustiness, evidence building, where we assess the level of competence, the level of reliability, and the level of honesty and non-harmful behavior of a certain party we are dealing with. So this is a definition that is taken from a philosopher, Honora O'Neill. And I think it's very to the point of stressing this relationship nature of the process. But what is the problem that we have with trust? If it's not correct, our assessment. This is what is called the calibration problem. Sorry, I have someone calling me and my watch is ringing while I'm talking. I hope you didn't hear it. So it's the calibration problem. So what may happen is that we have a wrong calibration in place, which may cause two types of problems. We may be over-trusting a technology, and this will cause deception. If you think about the autopilot in an autonomous vehicle, if we grant too much trust in the system, this may cause car accidents, and this is something that indeed has happened. In the same way, under-trusting may also be a problem, because we may miss the opportunity to take benefit of a superior performance that the technology could assist us with. Take the example of healthcare. If some advice would not be taken into account from the technology, while it could be even better than the advice of a doctor. However, I would like to recall that these are certainly important issues of things that may happen during the interaction, but they're not the only problems. So in the context of privacy, we have seen work that was highlighting how longitudinal problems may be caused by the lack of appropriate trust in the technology. So, for example, in the context of privacy, it has been observed the behavior of cynicism and resignation, where people basically were giving up on having control on how the technology was dealing with acquiring and dealing with their data. So this is, my opinion, something that we don't want to happen. And also anxiety. There is this beautiful paper, again in the domain of privacy, that we have been looking at as a setting recently, where they recall this sentence from the famous 1984 novel from George Orwell, where it's even the potential that the technology could be used in ways that we don't want. So there was no way of knowing whether you were being watched at any moment, being a source of anxiety, because it creates an unknown that is certainly not good, and this is another effect. I'm mentioning these issues because we may easily forget that there are also these longitudinal problems if we don't support well the relationship with the technology. So now let's get into the core of the talk, which is about trust as situated. So I will use examples from two studies that we did in the domain of privacy. So the first study was a survey of real users of social robots. You have seen those in the video that Martin was showing this morning. These are NAVER robots, autonomous. They navigate in the space on the base of image processing autonomously. And we surveyed the users, the employees of this workplace, about their possible concerns about privacy issues. And then we did also another study where we collected 100 conversations. In that case, we put users in context through videos, and we gave to them a chatbot for them to inquire about possible questions they had about privacy. This in order to understand how they were reasoning about privacy. So the full details about these two studies are in these two papers from IEEE Roman 24 and ACM Chi 24 for further interest. I will just take some examples from there. So let's start with the first dimension of trust. I already started to introduce that. But trust, it's a dynamic process. So we have some initial trust based on factors that can be categorized in personal factors, system factors, and contextual factors. And here I'm creating a simplified version of work that exists in the literature to make the point about this dynamic nature of trust. So personal factors are, for example, the demographics. As a boomer, I think differently, certainly, unfortunately, probably, from a Generation Z young person. Then there are my previous experiences with the technology and what I know at the beginning of my encounter about that specific technology. Then there are factors before the interaction, like the appearance of the technology. And Alessandra will tell us quite a bit about it, Janfer as well, both in terms of exploiting it and the risks that can be associated to that. And then there are contextual factors. I will deep dive more on these contextual factors that really refer to the environment where the technology is used and the people in this environment. And then, of course, there is an interaction going on, and this interaction is refining the initial trustworthiness assessment that can be done on the basis of those factors. So the more I use a technology, the more I learn about it, the more I can see what the technology is doing for me, and the more I am able to understand why it's behaving in a certain way, and also in relationship to the specificity of the situation I'm having that interaction, this trust assessment will be continuously adjusted. So now let's move to the second point. That is actually a refinement of what I just said, but I really want to exemplify it. That trusting happens in a context. So in this case, I'm using an example from our survey. So 55% of our respondents declare to trust the technology, these social robots moving around in the environment, because of contextual reasons. Especially, then there were also general reasons, but here I'm focusing on the contextual ones. The first one was the environment. In this case, the robots were deployed by NAVER and used by NAVER employees. That meant that the data were staying in-house, they were not moving outside the company, and this for them was a source of reassurance, and these features really specific to that environment. Another reason that they mentioned that relates to the environment is the fact that in that building there were already, prior to the deployment of the robots, CCTVs cameras. So in their answers, in the interviews that we made to them, they were saying, well, we are already used to the cameras, we do not see a big difference in having the robots around. Then, with respect to the actors involved in this setting, some were mentioning to trust the service provider, in this case, NAVER, because it has a reputation of being an ethical employer. So for that reason, they felt they had no reason to worry about their data and how they were going to be treated. And then again, talking about the actors, they were saying, we know that the machine learning people need to access this data, those technical users are part of the organization. They are in-house. Again, that's fine with us. We understand that type of need. So just to make it a bit alive, here there are some quotes from the users. And I particularly like this one where they were saying, Rookie is the internal name of the robot. It's our service asset. So we don't have any particular concern. But if it is an external robot, we may have concern. So exactly the same technology, they would say, here it's fine, in another place it's different. So you see how much the situated nature of trust is at play here. So then the third point that I want to make about the situated nature of trust is that trusting is driven by the practical concerns of the users, of all the actors, but here I'm focusing on the users. So if you may think, okay, that was internal technology, everyone was fine with it, no, because 45% said to us that actually they didn't feel so comfortable with the technology on the topic of privacy because, and here it's the key point, of practical concerns that they had. So some were really generous. So they were saying, I signed something at the beginning when I joined the company that was mentioning data treatment, etc. I don't even remember what I signed. I vaguely remember it was related to how the data are handled. So that doesn't make me feel really comfortable. Others were mentioning the fact that they heard bad examples somewhere else, and this was making them feel uncomfortable, not being completely at ease. But then, so these were practical things. They were thinking, okay, it happened somewhere else, data leakages, these days with generative AI, deepfakes, etc. It may happen here too, something concrete and important for them. Then there were contextual reasons. So some were mentioning the possible use of this data for aggregation by management. So for example, to understand if they were taking too many breaks, at what time they were arriving, with whom they were taking the break, and things of this kind. Others mention that the mobility of the robot may cause the accidental access to confidential information. So, for example, when entering in the meeting room with on display something that is confidential, or even at the desk, because they were saying after COVID, we are having many more video conferences from the desk because the offices are less dense. We have more confidential stuff on the monitor that we had before, and the robot passing by may get into that. And this was making them at unease. And then arriving to very specific things. We saw this in our conversations. Questions they were asked were really specific to some situation. Did the robot record my desk yesterday afternoon? Here you see different levels of detail. The key point is that they are all driven by what matters to the user about the treatment of the data. Then a note on the styles that we saw in the conversations. We saw simple 5W, the 5W used in journalism, who, what, why, where, and when type of questions, through which they were trying to understand what is the data journey. So the questions were not from a technology perspective, which data are required by the navigation algorithm. different levels of detail. Some were going in depth, some were going in breadth, which means that for some, it was really important then to continue on the same question and unpack it, while others wanted to have an overview of many things. And this is related to the fact that the provision of knowledge could go in both directions. So the practical reasoning of people is very personalized. You know? For some, to answer to a question, to give details was a cause of even more questions and more anxiety. And I find this very, very interesting, very fascinating. And for others, humans should get into the loop at a certain point on certain specific questions. I think I'm a bit out of time. I take a bit longer. Well, you can see here some sentences. I feel scary because I don't know how data are acquired. It is a very general practical concern. Now, the last part, and I will be a bit quickly on it, is what we're doing with all of this. We're thinking that this network of actors, the users, the service providers, the technical developers, other actors, like in the case of privacy data protection officer, are an asset that can be put in the loop of defining the principles that are important for driving this process of trustworthiness evidence building, and do that before deployment and continuously monitor how they are respected. So I will probably finish with this one. So we are thinking of a system where the principles that are driving this trustworthiness evidence building that are very specific, and actually we believe they can be defined by setting and then specialized in a deployment, should be defined by the actors in charge of this deployment. We are constructing a dashboard to do evaluations of how the chatbot answers to them and refine them for local adaptation, and then having the users in the loop for seeing these principles and then providing continuous feedback through the interaction with the chatbot for having this continuous loop of adaptation of principles in support of trustworthiness evidence building. In the presentation, there are more examples about the principles that were taken from the privacy domain, but for the sake of time, I will not show the video neither. So in terms of takeaways, a key point that is really important when we design for trustworthiness is to take into account that trust is highly situated on, and that's the big challenge of this topic, on a large number of factors. So we touched upon in the panel this morning on this topic, how to generalize and then specialize. So it is the problem when we deal with this topic. It's a continuous process. It doesn't stop at deployment. It's driven by contextual factors, and the user practical orientations are very, very important, because without understanding those, this relationship cannot be supported. And, oops, the tools and method of analysis, what we are working on to provide them to the local actors involved in the deployment of a technology. Thanks.